Welcome back. I'm trying to finish up this book, The Battle for Christmas by Stefan Nossenbaum. We're almost done. Uh, I didn't meet my goal of finishing it by the end of February. Had a lot of interruptions, but we're going to get it done. We're in the last chapter, and we're going to be. Then I'm going to read out of the other book on the Christian life. I'm going to do 30 minutes at the most because I'm running low on time. And then read a chapter out of the other book. So we'll get started again. Those of you who've made it this far and want to finish up this book, we will continue until we get it finished. Now, this is the history of Christmas in the United States. I'm on page 270 in this reading, and this portion I'm about to read out of is called Gifts. Where did this idea of gifts come from? How is it affected in various regions of the country? That's one of the things that he's talking about. So, and minstrel, when he says the word minstrel, he's talking about these early traditions of Christmas where they were being loud and rambunctious and raiding homes for demanding wine and food and things like that. That's kind of the minstrel, the acting up in the streets during the early stages of Christmas in the United States. So let's pick up there in the middle of page 270. Christmas Minstrel entitled, I'm sorry, not entitled, let me try it again. Christmas Minstrel entailed even more than leisure and liberty. It also meant a symbolic turning of the tables between masters and slaves. Christmas was, now remember, Minstrel in New England was when the working class was demanding things from the upper class, and they kind of swapped roles for a short time. Of course, some argued that this came from Saturnalia. It was something they did in ancient Rome, where the slaves would be would swap places with the royalty in Rome for one day, and then it would switch back, or it was a day or a week. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, short period of time and part of this celebration of Saturnalia. And the whole idea was just a way of keeping the lower class kind of happy so they don't revolt against the upper class is really what it was all about. So Christmas misrule entailed even more than leisure and liberty. It also meant a symbolic turning of the tables between masters and slaves. Christmas was the one occasion of the year at which plantation owners formally offered special presents to their human chattel. The high deferring to the low. It was a rare planter who did not give something to his slaves at Christmas. At a minimum, the gifts were small, the kind of things we might dismiss today as trinkets, but which the slaves had good reason to value. Sugar, tobacco, or hats, along with ribbons, bandanas, and other decorative items for the women. Some slaveholders distributed money. An essentially lavish and ostentatious example of this practice was reported by Richard Jones, a former slave from South Carolina, whose account also reminds us of how demeaning such ritualized generosity could be. That's where, of course, this is this misrule that occurs in the South, right? But the slave owners really they were very misruled themselves in a certain way. Anyway, I'll read as it is written here. Mars Alice carried a roll of money as big as my arm. He would come up to the quarter on Christmas, July 4th, and Thanksgiving, and get up on a stump and call all the chillins out. Then he would throw money to 'em. The chillins got dimes, nickels, quarters, half dollars, and dollars. At Christmas, he would throw $10 bills. The parents would take the $5 and $10 bills and change, but Martha made them let the children's. or the children keep the small change. It ain't never seed. Oh, see, I ain't never seed so much money since my master been gone. And that's a direct quote of what was written back then. Often slave owners provided much of the food and drink that made the slaves' festive parties possible. Alcohol was standard at these frolics, often as much as the slaves could consume during the course of a holiday. William Alston's agent in Charleston wrote in 1815, I send also 2 demijohns of whiskey for the slaves at Christmas. I'll substitute the word. Remember that alcohol in any amount was forbidden to slaves except on this occasion. Gifts of food, often fine food, usually accompanied the liquor. Former slaves remembered with pleasure, even many years later, the special food they had received at Christmas. Oh, what a time us blank did have on Christmas Day. Recalled Georgia Baker during her old age in the 1930s. Marsh Lord North and Marsh Ellick gave us something you could name to eat. Cake of all kinds, fresh meat, light bread, turkeys, chickens, ducks, geese, and all sorts of wild game. There was always plenty of pecans, apples, and dried peaches, too, at Christmas. Solomon Northrop, a free black who was kidnapped into slavery in Louisiana and later wrote an account of his misfortunes, was willing to wax nostalgic over the wonderful food, excuse me, with which he and his fellow slaves had been furnished on Christmas. In addition to biscuits, fruit preserves, and all kinds of pies, Northwood remembered that chickens, ducks, turkeys, pigs, and not infrequently the entire body of a wild ox are roasted. For one wealthy South Carolina planter, a single ox was not enough. On the morning of Christmas, Colonel Alston gave orders that as many beeves might be butchered as to supply all with meat, which, as a general thing, is not allowed them. No less than 21 bullocks fell sacrifices to the festivity. What these accounts make plain is that what many planters did for their slaves at Christmas was exactly what landed gentlemen in Europe had long been expected to do for their dependents on this occasion. Often, uh, uh, offer them the best food from the private stock, the same food that would ordinarily be shared only with family and invited guests. An 1857 article on Christmas in the South that appeared in Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper was certainly exaggerating the picture, but not inventing it, when it reported that the slaves consumed kinds of dishes that would create a sensation at a palatable or a palatal resident's wedding party. The quote, on these occasions, the culinary resources of the great house are brought into requisition, and young mistress spends many hours in the kitchen superintending the production of rich cakes and other delicacies, which now garnish the plentiful board of festive plantation life. End quote. One former slave later recalled that on Christmas, the master would give us chicken and barrels, old apples and oranges. But he went on to put the matter in cooler perspective. Of course, every master weren't as free-handed as our was. I's heard that a heap of colored people never had nothing good to eat. end quote. Still, slaves eagerly waited their Christmas gifts. One later recalled his feelings of intense anticipation in terms that almost had the ring of a visit from St. Nicholas. Quote, that night their slumbers were filled with dreams and visions of new suits, new shoes, new caps, and new dresses. These things were not given out until Christmas morning. And while this glad day was perhaps only a month off, yet the month seemed longer, the days seemed longer, and the nights seemed longer than at any other season of the year. The anxiety, the longing, and the solicitude of the dawn of Christmas morning is indescribable. End quote. Of course, the intensity of that longing also suggests what the slave's diet was like the rest of the year. One slave made it plain that the meat he and his fellows received on Christmas constituted their entire annual allotment. They never had meat except at Christmas, when each hand on the place received about 3 pounds of pork. Another told an interviewer that he had not tasted meat since Christmas. And the expectation of special gifts, like the expectation of holiday time itself, raised hopes that could be used for purposes of social control by the threat of withholding some or all the gifts of the planter's rules were broken. The historian Kenneth Stump notes that the value and quality of the presents often depended upon their conduct during the past year. The planters themselves openly confirmed the point when they listed the rules they used to regulate the lives of their slaves. One noted that if he discovered any of his slaves drinking alcohol during the year, the standard punishment he imposed was a whipping and a forfeiture of $5 at next Christmas. Another planter punished all his slaves at Christmas for petty thefts that had been committed during the previous year. If a depredation is committed, no matter by whom, my blank are collectively responsible for it, and double its value is deducted from the Christmas present. So it didn't matter who among the slaves did it, all the slaves were punished, according to that guy. Sounds like boot camp. That one guy messed up, we all got punished. This planter's standard gift for his slaves consisted of corn. So he was able to boast that a few barrels of corn are made the means of saving my property to perhaps 10 times the amount the whole year, and I am also spared the painful necessity of frequent chastisements. Slavery was a horrible time in the history of our country. And man stealing is condemned in the Bible, it's condemned in the book of Leviticus. And of course, it mentioned the one slave here that was kidnapped into slavery. It was a free man, and he was kidnapped into slavery. That's a clear violation of Scripture. And I don't know what the churches and the pastors were thinking at that time, but it should have been rebuked. That dismissive comment about a few barrels of corn suggests another, equally cynical use of Christmas gifts. When planters used the ritual of Christmas gift giving to provide their slaves with necessities, winter clothing, for example. The historian Norris Jones has pointed this out, adding that planters could thus arrange to appear loving and magnanimous before their people, even when furnishing basic necessities. But even when the presents were more special than that, and they usually were, some whites knew very well that this generosity also worked to protect their own interest. Here again, the dynamics of Christmas in the South, or in the slave South, help to eliminate. I'll read it again so it's clearer. Here again, the dynamics of Christmas in the slave South help to illuminate those in Europe, where too The landed gentry expected to get something in return for their generosity, the goodwill of their dependents. Remember the vessels of the old English wassail songs, wishing master and mistress good health and fortune in the coming year. E.P. Thomas has shown that landed gentlemen could always try to use a generous handout at Christmas as a way of making up for a year's accumulation of small injustices. In the slave South, one white overseer showed how clearly he understood the meaning of the Christmas gift exchange when he wrote to the planter who employed him. I killed 28 head of beef for the children's Christmas dinner. I can do more with them in this way than if all the hides of that cattle were made into lashes. We have a little bit of time, so the next part is gestures of deference. And I may not make it through all of that whole section. I might hold here because that next section might take about 30 minutes to get through. And I am limited on time tonight. So this will be a short reading, and I'll get into the next book because I'm adding a book since I'm at the end of this one. I'm doing another one that I'm starting, and it's a late one. We had time change, so that clock is incorrect. It's actually coming up about 10 p.m. and I'm limited on time at 10 p.m. So we're going to close this one out. We'll come back in the next reading, Gestures of Defense. I hope you enjoy the series, and we'll come back with On the Christian Life, a section out of the Institutes of the Christian Religion by John Calvin. Thank you.